This Evoke Therapy Program broadcast is for or about siblings, extended family, or friends of folks who have children at Evoke. So what that means is that I will take live questions from any of those groups of people, family, friends, siblings. I'll take questions on family, friends, and siblings also. And so you can ask even a question about, as if it were from a 10-year-old child, and I'll give you an idea about how I would answer it. When you submit your question, if you're a sibling, please let me know your age, because I'm going to speak differently to a 10-year-old than I am to a 20-year-old, although I'll try to make it understandable for all ages, because if there are younger children attending, we want them to get the benefit of it also. So before I begin, I'm going to start with some pre-submitted and frequently asked questions, and then we'll get into the live questions from there. So submit your live questions at any time. Question number one, why won't my child be ready to come home after Evoke? When we started wilderness therapy 20 years ago, our wilderness therapy program 20 years ago, it was our idea in the early days, because wilderness was such a powerful, impactful therapeutic program. We had in mind that many of the students would be ready to come home afterwards. And so theoretically, educationally, we were inclined to think in those ways. But it was through experience that we realized that by the time children got to the point where they needed a wilderness therapy program, an out-of-home placement, that they often were best served by staying away longer. And the family was also. So it wasn't our theoretical idea that we would be recommending that so many clients and students don't come home after wilderness therapy, but it was our experience that told us that that was a better route. And I want to say this, because I think the assumption is that children that go home, are happier. I mean, I think that's what a lot of people would assume. But I will tell you this, when I go and visit schools and programs that have our students after Evoke, and I compare those to the children that I see in the local high school here, my experience shows me that by and large, the children in these therapeutic schools and programs are often happier. Yes, on the surface, on the front end, they would absolutely choose to go home. There's no doubt about that. But if they could live both lives, they would often see that these are safe places. And the progress that has begun at Evoke can and ought to continue at a therapeutic school. I was just talking to a parent just before I started the broadcast this evening, who was sharing with me that her child misses it sometimes. And I said that's an incredibly common kind of experience. That's why so many of our staff are former clients. And so therapeutic programming can in some ways be the safest, happiest time of your life. It is challenging. There is structure. There is limitations on some of the freedom and choices, but those don't necessarily always lead to somebody being more happy in the long run or in the big picture. So it's just our experience that tells us that can often be a better course of therapy and treatment. Can our other child visit the field with us? I'm going to answer this question two ways. The default answer is no, that we don't recommend it. But there are exceptions. You can talk to your wilderness therapist about that, your child's wilderness therapist, because there are times, I was just talking to a parent last week where a sibling went out by themselves to spend some time. I had that happen in my group on several occasions. One even came for 4 weeks to spend 4 weeks with his brother. It was supposed to be 3, ended up being 4. But the idea is that in wilderness, we're a relatively short-term program. We're trying to narrow it down, our focus, into the child and his or her parents. And if we expand the audience, if you will, if we expand the amount of family members that are involved, it can dilute it. The siblings aren't often involved in the therapeutic education that we do. We like to do these webinar and podcast broadcasts once every 6 weeks or so. But the fact of the matter is that siblings are not immersed in the education that parents get. And so when they come out to the field, we can end up spending so much time with them, catching them up, right? Doing a lot of work with them, that we don't get to spend the same amount of focused time with the child and the relationship that they have with their parents. So it's just about that. But there are exceptions. You can ask your wilderness therapist. When I found that the sibling has been incredibly close, invested, Maybe they themselves have sought for some support in this process, and the wilderness client, the wilderness student, was doing particularly well. We started off with letters sometimes, then those would be the exceptions to the rule. So the general rule is no, and there are exceptions to the rule, and your wilderness therapist can talk about that when we try to be very intentional about it. Will my child also write letters to home to their siblings? Again, it's case by case with the therapist, but oftentimes this is the case. Again, we start off early in the program with it just being between parents and children. Sometimes children will write in hopes and intentions letter. That can be appropriate, especially if they were impacted by what was going on in the family, by the pain, the struggle that everybody was experiencing. So writing a hopes and intentions letter is a very, very common practice for siblings. Not all of them, but it's relatively common. And then beyond that, again, it's going to be where your child who's in the wilderness, where they're at in their program, how focused they're being. Again, we find that when we expand the focus too much to too many letters to too many people, that it can be distracting. They're looking forward to the newsy types letters from their siblings compared to the focus work that's often contained in the letters between parents and children. But sometimes they're the most impactful in talking to their brother or their sister. Sometimes it can be helpful for them to begin to work on the relationship by writing some of those letters, especially the hopes and intentions letter. I've seen many clients and students respond most sensitively to a hopes and intentions letter from a sibling, more so than a parent, because I think they feel like they're on the same team, right? They don't have an adversarial relationship. Their heart is softer towards their siblings, so that can be a very powerful experience. So again, talk to your wilderness therapist, but that can be more common. And as your child moves through the program, it's much more common that they have opportunities to write letters to their siblings. How far will my child typically hike in a day? It depends on several things. It depends upon time of the year. You know, the warmer, longer days, we can get longer hikes in. It depends upon how well the group is getting along, functioning, you know, getting camp set up in the evening and breaking camp in the morning. You know, if they take 2 or 3 hours to kind of get camp broke, get it ready for it to move, you're going to have less time during the day. We would like them, ideally, this is kind of the standard, we would like for 5 days a week for them to be moving. 2 days a week are called layover days. And layover days are days when the therapist comes in, they get new food, new laundry, they're taking showers, they're working on their written and reading assignments, so that it's a lot easier to do, of course, when you're sitting during the day. So 2 layover days, sometimes 3, but typically 2, and then 5 hiking days. And so it's not even so much how far they hike. It might be a 1 or a 2 mile hike. It depends upon the terrain. Sometimes they're hiking cross country, not on a trail or a road. And so if that's the case, you're gonna travel not as far. You're gonna travel less distance. So it really does depend. You know, my group back in the day, during those 5 days, they were hiking from 2 to 6 miles a day, and that's a lot with a heavy backpack and oftentimes cross country. Taking breaks during the day for lunch, taking breaks to do some reading and some personal time. But it varies widely. Do you have any tips about how to deal with my guilt for sending my child away? Well, it's a great question. I think first and foremost, I would say it's really, really important that parents work on their guilt. I've said for years, for decades, that guilt for a parent can inhibit a parent's ability to foster self-esteem in the child, which might not sound like it makes sense. But if I, as a parent, feel so guilty that I'm not able to assert myself, that I'm apologizing or trying to make up for things, right? All of those kinds of behaviors compromise me. It's hard to make my child accountable. Let's say my wife and I had gone through a really bad divorce, okay? And I feel guilty about that. Sometimes I'll make excuses for the child. Sometimes I'll feel so badly for what I did that I'll be held hostage by that guilt, and I won't be able to to reasonably expect anything from my child. So it's really important that we go and work on our guilt. That's why we ask you to go to Al-Anon. That's why we ask you to go to Coda. That's why we ask you to go to a therapist when at home. And I'm going to go a step farther, and we have a broadcast on shame and guilt. But I do not believe that shame and guilt serve us in our moral development. In fact, it's my belief that guilt gets in the way of doing the right thing as often as it does help us to do the right thing. I can tell you that I've had hundreds, perhaps thousands of conversations with clients, parents, where I've asked them, they've said, I knew what the right thing to do was, but I didn't do it. And when I've asked them why, their answer was, I felt guilty. I felt guilty to do the right thing. A fantastic book about this is also The Dance of Anger. It's a strange title compared to what it really talks about. But The Dance of Anger by Harriet Lerner, I also did a broadcast on that, talks about this idea. And she says in there, stating a specific anecdote, a specific story, she says, one woman, one of her clients said, I knew that if I didn't assert myself with my father, that I was going to feel angry. So I had to learn to tolerate my guilt for a little while in order to do the right thing. So guilt is kind of this legacy that we carry on to, that we think that our job is to make other people happy, and that if somebody else is upset with us, it started with our parents, that we did something wrong, and it's just not true. We all can think of examples in our lives where doing the right action in a relationship, even between a parent and a child, might cause us to feel guilty. So we have to learn to live with our guilt, to tolerate it, eventually get to a point where that's not what's driving us. Love is what's driving us. Being authentic, being honest, being caring, being compassionate. Those drive us, not guilt. So that's a little bit of a sidetrack, but I'm committed to this message because I think so many people misunderstand the value and role of guilt in our lives and in our development, our moral development. It is as much or more of a hindrance than it is a help most of the time. When you go to Al-Anon and Codependence Anonymous, you'll sit with a bunch of people there who are absolutely aware of how guilt has destroyed lives and relationships. Next question, how can I best support my brother who is at a vote? They didn't put their age here, but it's a very common question that I get. The best thing that I would tell siblings, the thing that I would tell siblings that I think is most important is be interested in what they're learning as much as you can. Being on this broadcast, this webinar, listening to it or watching it is helpful. Go to our podcast library. Look at the titles. Find one or two that sound interesting to you and listen to it. And then share that with your brother in a letter. And this is really important. Don't worry about saying the right thing or getting it perfect. It's wonderful for our clients and our students at Evoke. It's wonderful for them because many of them have been the problem, right? The identified patient, the screw up in the family, right? You didn't get sent here, they did. And so it's really nice for them to kind of know something. And they do learn things that people that don't have to go through this don't learn. So show up humble. Talk about what you're learning. Ask questions. Just honor them and their work by dipping your foot in the pool of what they're doing and learning about it a little bit. I had a sibling ask me years ago. She was going to have the first discussion with her sibling after a long period of time, and she hadn't been on any of the phone calls with the parents, and so she wasn't up to speed. She called me. The parents asked if she could. I said yes. She called to find out how to get it right. What's the right thing to say? And she was really anxious that she was going to mess up or set her brother back. And I said, why don't you just tell him that? Just tell him that you're anxious. You've been the perfect one. He's been the screw up. And so if you just tell them that you're anxious and you're afraid of saying the wrong thing, it actually might feel nice for him for once to not be the only kid in the family that doesn't know how to get it right. And it was hard for her. In fact, I don't think she was ever able to hear that and do that. But how nice would it have been if she would have showed up scared and anxious and honest about it? And how great would it be for once in their relationship for him to be the one that is not anxious of messing up? or of making a mistake. Or maybe he would feel that way too, and they could connect on it. So I say dip your foot in the pool, become interested in what they're learning, be humble, show up honestly, and respect what they know and what they learned in this process. Even if your brother or sister doesn't come home perfect, and they're not, none of them are going to come home perfect, there's some powerful things that you learn by going through this experience that you cannot learn any other way. And it's okay to honor that. It's actually really fantastic to honor that. Why so little contact between parents and children while they are at a vote? That's a great question, and there's a few ideas here. Number one, think about a child who gets in an accident in a car, right? When they get to the emergency room, the parents are going to be asked to stay outside of the emergency room, right? Then when the child gets stabilized, then the parents are going to come in. And then when the child gets more stabilized and is getting healthier and healthier, family and friends are going to come in. It's a similar kind of model. We just want to keep our focus narrow. But I'll say this. The first ingredient, this goes for all of us in all our relationships. The first ingredient in an intimate relationship is a healthy self, a healthy, whole, individual self. That's the ingredient, the first ingredient in a healthy, intimate relationship. My wife and I go to therapy. We're both therapists. We both have the same therapist who also serves as our marriage therapist. And years early in our marriage, we would go to therapy together, to marital therapy together. In the last 8 years, 10 years, I think maybe we've been to 1 or 2 sessions together. But you better believe every single session I'm going to, I'm learning things that help me in my marriage and in my parenting. So the separation that happens is about helping each individual family member become a more whole self. And sometimes that's easier to accomplish initially one-on-one, and then experimenting with some family phone calls, some family visits, right? Putting all of that knowledge and awareness into practice. I'll tell you one quick story that I think powerfully illustrates this, and I've told it before. I had I had a client years ago who was eager to talk to his parents on the phone. He had been asking for a few weeks, because this is a stage that nearly all of our clients arrive at some point during the program, as they get phone calls with the therapist and maybe even a phone call about the therapist. And so he was eager, and he wasn't quite ready, right? Just had some work to do. It wasn't like a behavioral thing. It's just I knew that he was a little bit fragile. But it came time when I thought, I think he's in a stable and grounded enough place where he can have a phone call with the parents, and it can be a healthier one. And so I was ready for it. Let's say it was week 5 or 6, week 6. And his father wrote an incredibly honest, authentic, vulnerable letter to his son, where the father starts to look at his own alcoholism and taking accountability for how it impacted the family, that he had driven drunk, other things that he had done, and that he himself was going into treatment while his son was with us. It was an incredibly courageous letter and courageous place to arrive at. And so the young man in my session read this letter from his father, and he was touched by it, a little bit overwhelmed by it, didn't know how to digest it, what to do with it. I had already told him he was going to have his phone call, and I was nervous about it. I was nervous that it was going to be so raw for him, and there'd be value in him taking his time. But it had been several weeks, and I was going to do it. And he said to me, he said, what, Brad? As much as I've wanted to talk to my parents, I don't want to talk to them this week. And I don't want to talk to them because I'm afraid if I get on the phone with my father, I'll lose myself. And I was incredibly impressed by the level of insight that took, and patience, and tolerance. And so he took a week just to digest it, to think about it. Had a phone call with his father the following week that was fantastic, and later during their reunion they had a fantastic time together. But I just want to say it's an example of separation individual development, developing a more complete and whole individual self, is how we create intimacy. And so that's kind of why we do it in the order that we do it. We sent my daughter to evoke. Her sister, still at home, doesn't want to talk about her sister. How can we get her to open up? You know, I get questions like this often. And my answer would be, you don't get her to open up. You respect the defense. You respect the wound to begin. You respect it. Your daughter at home still has a perfectly good reason, I am sure, of not wanting to talk to her sister. And in some cases, many cases, I guess it might be the case here, there was stuff that went on at home that was hurtful, that was chaotic, that was outside of her control, the sister at home, the daughter at home. And this is her way of taking her power back. So I would at first honor her request, respect it, empathically support it, tell her, you know, it makes sense that she might want to take some space, and know that in the long arc of their relationship, there will be other movements. You know, this will pass. But if you just try to pry her open, in essence, you may be doing to her exactly what has been done to her past, which is exposing her to something painful without any control on her part. So the best way to encourage her to open up is to respect her decision to stay closed on the matter for right now. And be patient. Respect it and honor it. That's what I would say. All right, I'm happy to take any live questions that have come in. First question from a parent. During the wilderness program, are the kids exposed to news, events, sports at all? This is a 23-year-old sibling. Not a lot. I mean, if there's a huge event, we'll share it with them. I can remember 9/11. I brought out the newspaper the next day because it was big and it was affecting our whole culture. Every once in a while, I might spend a moment or so during a session. I worked with boys and I'm a sports fan, and so they would tell me that they're Vikings fan, and I'd say, oh, the Vikings progressed in the playoffs this week, or the Vikings lost in the playoffs this week. And so I would share a little bit. But again, we don't want to distract them with those things. We want them to get back to those things as soon as they're able, but we want to keep it focused. We don't allow them to read pleasure reading. I mean, they read a lot when they're with us. For the most part, more than most of them have read any other time in their life. But we don't allow pleasure reading or academic reading for the most part outside of our simple curriculum. And so it's not about things being good or bad. It's just about a level of focus. You know, there's a digital detox, and there's kind of a current event detox that goes on, so that we can get the focus on to figuring out what's going on inside of them that needs healing, that needs attention. So I would say a little bit big news events, but we keep it minimal. We're okay if parents and siblings in their letters write things like, we had a family reunion and you were missed. Sometimes families are afraid of saying something like that, or a wedding, or a birth of a child, or heaven forbid, the death of a beloved family member, extended family member. But even in those cases, there's still connection through those stories. And even if there's some grief in that I'm missing out on my sister's wedding, the idea is we want you to be with your sister's wedding. And in most of our clients' cases, those celebrations and those special times weren't happy when they were home because of the various struggles with relationships, conflicts, substances, depression that they had before. So it's a similar thing to like the holidays. I would often say to my clients, I don't really care about Christmas or Hanukkah 2018. I care about 2019, 20, 21, and 22. And so this is an investment in that. We don't rub their nose in it, but it's okay to mention it. So that's a little bit about family events and family activities. Looks like there are no other questions. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to, lots of people have joined us since I gave the introduction. So I'm going to go to that. If you're a sibling, a family member, a friend of an Evoke family, you can submit a question. If you're an Evoke parent, you can submit a question about or for and in behalf of a child. If you are a sibling, please tell me your age so I know what age to speak to. I'm going to go through upcoming events and announcements, other resources too. So even if you're not a parent, you can take a look at these, and then I'll have a slide at the end again for more questions if you want to submit one while I'm announcing these. We ask all parents, this could be for siblings too, all parents to go to 6 12-step support groups while your child is with us. Just try them out. They're free. Not much in the mental health field is free, and these are for people who have loved ones who are using substances, but not only using substances, but are self-sabotaging. So it's how do I be in a healthy relationship with somebody who's hurting themselves? Al-Anon, CODA, or Families Anonymous. You can also go to NAMI.org, NAMI.org, to find classes and resources in your area. You can listen to these broadcasts on the podcast app on your iPhone, or if you have an Android device, use the SoundCloud app. On a computer, you can go to soundcloud.com. So all of our webinars broadcast twice a week are available the next day on the podcast app. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Evoke Therapy, Facebook at Evoke Therapy, inspirational stories, links, articles, research, pictures, quotes from students. If you want to become involved with or find out about an organization of alumni parents who have organized themselves to help people that can't afford treatment, you can find the Evoke Family Foundation on Facebook. Our blog on the Evoke Therapy website has updated current content all the time from all of our therapists and staff. My book is called The Journey of the Heroic Parent. It's available on Amazon. Right now the warehouse is out of stock, so you have to go to the paperback version. You can buy a new copy from Evoke Therapy programs there. It's also available Kindle and Audible and a CD purchase on Amazon. If you want to do deeper work, by the way, you don't have to be the parent. About half of our participants are not parents. If you want to do a deeper intensive work, we have a lodge in Park City, Utah, where you can come and do a 4-day therapeutic intensive. Mindfulness, psychodrama, art, group work, 7 people, 2 facilitators. Finding You is June 6th through 10th. We have a couple of spots left, and then there are the dates throughout the year: July, August, October, November, December. We have a Finding You 2 coming up October 10th through 14th. We think that's going to fill up because we sent an email out and we got a lot of responses. So if you want to attend, this requires that you've attended a Finding You already. And then coming soon, this is brand new. We're going to open up an intensive for alumni, to have alumni that have gone through our program 18 years and older. They could have come to our program when they were 16 or 17, but if they're 18 now, we're going to have an intensive workshop, 4 or 5-day workshop for them coming up, so they can get reconnected, connect to a group, reconnect to their own work. And then you can do a private family intensive. We also have professional intensives for people in the field of therapy. The next women's one is May 20th through 22nd. The next opening for men's is June 10th through 12th. Parent support groups, these are free 2-hour groups we do all over the country. The next ones we have is Seattle on Saturday, May 12th, Denver on Monday, May 14th, and New York City, June 4th. We're going to put a Bay Area one on there pretty soon. Contact Melanie at evoketherapy.com for more information. We ask all current parents to go to a workshop. So June 23rd, 24th is our next workshop at our Entrada location. You can combine that with a visit to see your child if the timing is right. Contact Gail at evoketherapy.com for more information. If you want to do a pursuits trip, this is adventure therapy, 3 to 14 days, young adults or families. This is like therapy light, sober fun. Just a little bit of therapy, but mostly fun activities. All right. Happy to answer any of the live questions that have come in. My son has been in Evoke for 13 weeks. Although the therapist says he's ready for aftercare, a space is not available for 3.5 weeks. What do you do with all the extra time and willingness? I had cases like this that happened all the time. You know, It's not ideal. If he's ready, he's ready, and there's not a space. There's nothing anybody can do about that. But it is a long-term decision, and it's a relatively short period of time. It's some of the most powerful time when the child thinks that they're done. It really is. You know, the strength of wilderness is it's dynamic, it's provocative, it's powerful, it's unique, it's exciting, it's a relatively short program and dynamic change in a relatively short period of time. Having said that, folks, in life, not every day is dynamic. Tuesdays are just Tuesdays sometimes. And so while wilderness therapy is this very powerful, what I think is the most powerful intervention that I've ever seen, there's value in the mundane and learning how to deal with it. Learning how to deal with a Tuesday or a Wednesday, or when it stops becoming new and exciting. So they just live life. A lot of times toward the end of the program, we're offering and inviting them to do more mentoring. And as most of us know, you learn something more by teaching it than almost by any other way. So mentoring other students can be something. It's also interesting at the end of the program when they've been here that long. Because everybody that was there, that was the leader when they were there, is long gone. And so they'll say things like, it happens all the time, they'll say, you know, group two is not like it was in the old days. So different now, all these young, immature people. And so then our answer is, so what are you going to do with that? What are you going to do with that time? I would often say to this client, through a discussion, I would say, it's time to leave when the truck comes to pick you up, or when your parents come to pick you up. And until then, you're here. And so there are a lot of things in life that we have expectations, hopes, and plans for, and that don't go as planned. And really, especially for adolescents, young adults, the greatest challenges are dealing with those changes. Even for us parents, right? You had an idea about how life was going to go for you and for this child, and it's definitely not gone the way you planned. And that's a hard thing to adjust to. So we make it the therapy. It's grist for the mill, and it's challenging, and that challenge is important. So that's the answer. I used to at times feel heartbroken for them, but this was the kind of deeper philosophy that I learned to embrace, and I would empathize with their frustration and disappointment, because they deserve that. Because when stuff doesn't go our way, and when there's not a spot, and when you have to be on a waiting list, on and on and on, it's hard. So I don't try to talk them into it. I listen, I empathize, I understand, I share similar stories, and then we eventually get to these ideas that I've just shared with you. Any other questions, Alex? Looks like none have come in, so it looks like we're ready to wrap up. All right. Thank you for joining us, folks. I hope it's helpful. We'll have another one of these in just over a month. You can send in questions anytime, even if you are a sibling or a family member and didn't send one in. Happy to address those. The next webinar, the next broadcast, Evoke Therapy Program broadcast, will be on this Wednesday, May 2nd at 7 p.m. Mountain Time, and it's on the importance of good nutrition and also mindfulness in wilderness therapy in the field. So look forward to that. Have a great couple of days. Thank you for joining us. For and on behalf of your family member and relative and loved one, thank you for your participation. Somebody just asked the question, how do you send in a question? You send it to webinar@evoketherapy.com. That's for suggestions, advice, ideas, feedback, or questions. Webinar@evoketherapy.com. Have a great couple of days, and I'll talk to you Wednesday. Take care. Bye-bye.